So today we're going to go over types of evidence. First thing you need to know about evidence is this guy named Dr. Emman Locard. He's known as the father of forensics, and he established the first forensics lab in Lyon, France in 1910. And he's best known for Locard's exchange principle. Well, what is it? It states that when a person comes into contact with an object or another person, a cross-transfer of physical evidence can occur, or does occur. The exchanged materials indicate that the two entities were in contact. Like if you touch your desk, you leave fingerprints, which shows that you were there. Maybe like a hair came off or something came off and fell on the table, stating that you were there at some point. This evidence bears witness to, like a silent witness to the criminal act, if indeed a crime occurred. The intensity, duration, and nature of the entities in contact determine the extent of the transfer. So the longer you're there, the more you transfer. Forensics is built upon this principle. Cross-transfer creates evidence. Evidence solves crimes. Evidence can be found in many forms. Investigators must be able to classify evidence. Evidence is either circumstantial, which is put into two different parts, or direct. So direct. Direct is by itself, circumstantial, two different types. Yes, I was right. So direct includes firsthand observations. Like you can directly connect it to somebody, like eyewitness accounts. That person saw the other person. Police dashboard or police cams on their chest. That connects that person because you can see that person directly. Video surveillance, voice recordings, signed ransom notes, reports like toxicology, lab, and etc. So here, you remember from John Bonet, this is a signed ransom note. This directly connects it to that person who signed it, as opposed to a non-signed, which is not direct evidence because you can't directly say it's to that person. So if a police is interviewing, that is also considered one because it's a direct thing. They can directly connect it to that person. Next, you have circumstantial. So circumstantial can be put into two different parts. It is indirect evidence that can be used to imply a fact, but not directly prove it. Like direct, remember, one-on-one, that they see it. This is, well, it could be that person. How? Like fingerprints, which we'll get into, bite marks, tire prints, DNA, ballistics, fibers, hair. Now this gets broken up into a couple different parts because you have, it's such a broad range, they broke it into physical and biological. Physical, this is all prints, bullets, weapons, synthetic fibers. Biological, anything biological, DNA, hair, natural fibers. Hair is specific with one other thing. Let's just put it that way. So then, ways to classify it. You've got class and individual. And so overall, you can do class. This narrows a group of people or items. This is like hair. Like I was talking about, hair can be broken up even further. So with hair, if it's got the follicle, like if I rip it out, my hair out, and I've got like the little bits on the end, that's the follicle. When I have that follicle, they can trace it to me, and it's to me. Whereas hair without it, it's class. There's certain parts in the hair, which we'll learn about, that can go towards a class of people. Blood type. I am A negative. My boys are O negative. So if they pop up a blood type, they're like, oh, it's O negative. Well, then you could look at my boys. Whereas if it's A negative, you could probably look towards me. Shoe prints. Remember, shoes come in all different sizes, and they're all the same. So it's not individualized. And then you got individual. This narrows it down to one individual. So like when I rip my hair out and I got that follicle, they can link it to me. DNA, they can link my DNA to me. Fingerprints, for the most part, can be individual, but you'll learn a little bit more about that in a little while. All right, now we've got this.
Today you will learn about the major categories of forensic evidence. There are 4 main classification schemes for evidence: physical versus non-physical, real versus demonstrative, known versus unknown, and class versus individual. So let's start with physical versus non-physical. Physical evidence includes any kind of tangible item from a forensic crime or accident scene. This category is what you normally think of when you talk about evidence. Things like bullets, shoe prints, fingerprints, blood samples, fiber evidence, etc. Non-physical evidence includes items of evidence that are non-tangible. Things like eyewitness testimony or an opinion from an expert witness. The next category of evidence is real versus demonstrative. Real evidence is a broad category that includes any evidence generated by criminal activity. For example, blood spatter left by the criminal or shell casings left from a fired handgun. In other words, evidence created by the criminal at the scene of the crime. Some of this overlaps with physical evidence. Demonstrative evidence is any kind of representation of an object designed to present in the courtroom. In other words, things created for courtroom purposes after the event of a crime. Examples of this type of evidence would be photos, diagrams, x-rays, models, things like that. Another category of evidence is known versus unknown. Known evidence is evidence in which the source can be determined with certainty at the scene of the crime without later laboratory testing. For example, a blood sample taken from a victim at the scene of the crime. Unknown evidence is when you do not know the source of the evidence without performing laboratory testing at a later date. Examples of this would be blood spatter evidence at the crime scene. You only know whose blood it is after you do DNA testing back at the lab. Last but not least, a very important category of evidence is individual versus class evidence. Individual evidence is evidence that can be linked with only one source. This source can be a person or even an object. Examples of individual evidence would be DNA samples, fingerprints, and specific wear patterns, including wear patterns on fired bullets, shell casings, tool marks, and shoe prints. Class evidence is evidence that is common to a group of objects or people and cannot be linked to a single source. Fiber evidence is a great example of class evidence because you can never link it to a single source. Other examples include blood type evidence, hair evidence where you don't have the root which contains DNA, or shoe prints when you don't have individualizing wear patterns. So as you can see, some pieces of evidence can fall into multiple evidence categories. But it is important to understand the major distinctions between these classifications in forensic cases, especially the difference between individual and class evidence. It is critical that forensic scientists and jury members understand this distinction, as the ability to pinpoint evidence to a single person can make the difference between a conviction and an acquittal.
All right, so after this, you are going to work on completing the types of evidence worksheet, which is on GoFormative. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Use your notes. And besides that, I hope you guys have a great day.